It was the beginning of July when the heat wave hit our small suburban neighborhood. The air was thick, humid, like a blanket that had just been pulled too tight over everything. The kind of summer where even the sidewalks seemed to wilt beneath the sun's unforgiving gaze. People were doing their best to stay cool, hanging out in air-conditioned homes or lounging by the local pool, sipping on iced drinks and fanning themselves. Me, I was sitting in my living room, staring out of the front window. We had just finished a long week at work, and I was trying to unwind after a tiring day of meetings and deadlines. I usually do this: watch the world pass by, maybe spot a couple of joggers struggling in the heat, or see kids racing their bikes down the street, laughing like the world couldn't touch them. It's funny how you notice things when you're bored. It's even funnier how the smallest things can set off an entire chain of events that change your life forever. That afternoon, I noticed something odd. Our next-door neighbor, Greg, was loading his car with what looked like a weekend bag. Now, Greg was a bit of a recluse. He was the kind of guy who didn't interact much with the rest of the neighborhood. Maybe it was because of his job as a software developer, but he always seemed like he was too absorbed in his work to come outside and chat. His house was quiet, almost eerily so, except for his dog, Buc'ee. Buc'ee was a golden retriever, a big, shaggy dog with a heart of gold. He had been Greg's companion for years. I often saw them walking together in the mornings before Greg left for work. Buc'ee would always look back at Greg, his tail wagging, like he was worried about his owner leaving him behind. He was sweet and gentle, the kind of dog who would sit at the edge of the sidewalk and wait for you to pass, then follow you for a few steps just to make sure you were okay. But on that day, as I watched Greg load up his car, Buc'ee was nowhere in sight. It wasn't until a few hours later that I realized something was off. By the time the sun started to set and the evening heat became unbearable, I noticed that Buc'ee was still nowhere to be found. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was inside. Maybe Greg was taking him with him. But then the hours passed and I began to grow concerned. I figured maybe Greg had gone for a quick errand. But the next morning, around 9 a.m., I walked past Greg's house and saw Buc'ee again. Only this time, he wasn't waiting patiently for Greg to return. He was pacing in the backyard, frantic, his tail drooping between his legs as he pressed his nose against the sliding glass door. He wasn't barking, which was unusual for him. Usually, if he saw someone, he'd greet them with a wagging tail and a couple of barks. I had lived next to Greg for over 5 years, and in all that time, I had never seen Buc'ee like this. His behavior was unsettling, like he was trying to communicate something. But I couldn't quite put my finger on what. I wanted to call out to him, but I didn't. It wasn't my place. Still, something tugged at my chest. Later that day, I took a walk down to the grocery store, and when I passed Greg's house again, Buc'ee was still in the backyard. His fur was matted with sweat, and I noticed that he was drinking from an empty bowl that had been left out for him. There was no sign of food, no fresh water, just that empty bowl. I felt a sense of dread creep over me. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something didn't seem right. I turned around and walked back home, pacing in my kitchen, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was only that evening when my phone rang. "Hey, it's Maria," my other neighbor, who lived a few doors down from me, said. "Have you seen Greg today?" "No, but I saw him left early yesterday morning and no one knew. I've been trying to call him too, but I haven't heard back. I'm starting to think something's not right." I replied, "But he left Buc'ee in the backyard." "Why?" "Well, he didn't tell anyone, but he went on vacation for the weekend," Maria said, her voice thick with concern. "I've been trying to reach him for hours, but no one is picking up. His phone's going straight to voicemail." "Wait," I said, my heart skipping a beat. "He went away and left Buc'ee outside?" Maria is a soft-hearted woman, always trying to help out, always looking out for the animals and people in our neighborhood. If she said something wasn't right, I believed her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it had been hours since I had seen Buc'ee, and he was still pacing around in the backyard, looking as lost and confused as I felt. I couldn't just stand by. I had to do something. That night, as the stars twinkled overhead, I went over to Greg's house. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I could see through the windows that the house was empty. Buc'ee was still there, pacing anxiously in the backyard. I knew I couldn't leave him out there in the heat. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how bad the situation had gotten. I hadn't seen Greg all day, and Maria was right. No one knew where he was or how long he would be gone. Buc'ee, his loyal dog, had been left behind, alone, without food, without water, and without any sign of help. I walked back to my house, grabbed a spare leash, and then carefully made my way into the backyard. Buc'ee immediately perked up when he saw me, his tail wagging furiously, his eyes wide and full of hope. "Hey, boy," I whispered, kneeling down to his level. I attached the leash to his collar, and he followed me without hesitation, his eyes locked onto mine like he knew I was trying to help. I went back inside and grabbed a bowl of water, filling it up and placing it in front of him. Buc'ee lapped at it eagerly, as though he hadn't had a drink in days. Then I grabbed some treats from my pantry and gave him a few, watching as he devoured them in a matter of seconds. It wasn't until I sat down with him on the back porch that I realized how much of a bond had already been formed. Buc'ee wasn't just Greg's dog anymore. He was my responsibility too, even if it was just for this one night. I stayed with him for a few hours, making sure he was comfortable, giving him all the attention I could. I felt a deep sense of guilt, realizing that Greg hadn't thought to ask anyone to take care of Buc'ee while he was gone. What kind of person leaves their dog like that? I couldn't imagine leaving my own dog without a second thought, but here we were. As I sat there in the quiet, watching the stars above, something shifted inside me. I had no idea what was going on with Greg, but I knew one thing for sure: Buc'ee deserved better. And I wasn't going to let him suffer, even if it meant stepping up when no one else had. The next morning, I went to work and spoke to Maria. Together, we decided that we couldn't wait any longer. We had to find out what had happened to Greg. We contacted the police, who agreed to help us investigate. It turned out that Greg had gone away for the weekend, but the authorities couldn't reach him. No one could. He hadn't left any instructions for his neighbors, and Buc'ee was left behind, alone. The police found Greg's phone on a bus bench, miles away from our neighborhood. He had gotten off at a stop, but no one knew where he had gone after that. It was clear he hadn't planned for what had happened. But Buc'ee was safe, thanks to a community of people who wouldn't let him go hungry or scared. Days turned into weeks, and Buc'ee had become a part of my daily routine. Morning walks, late-night cuddles on the porch, even the occasional trip to the park. The neighborhood had unofficially adopted him, and he seemed to blossom with the attention. But still, one question loomed over all of us: where was Greg? A few more days passed, and just as we were about to start considering longer-term care for Buc'ee, Greg showed up. He walked up the driveway just after 6 p.m., looking like a ghost of himself, sweaty, pale, and disoriented. His shirt was wrinkled and stained, and he was missing one of his shoes. I happened to be outside watering my plants when I saw him and froze, not knowing whether to be relieved or furious. Greg blinked a few times, like he couldn't process where he was. "Hey," he mumbled, scratching the back of his neck. "Is Buc'ee okay?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared. "Greg, where the hell have you been?" That's when he broke down. He told me he had been planning to go away for a weekend retreat, a kind of tech detox, a solo trip upstate. He thought he could leave Friday morning, get in a few days of hiking, and be back Sunday night. He even had a dog-sitting service lined up through an app, some random user with a high rating. He said he left the gate unlocked and instructed the sitter to let themselves in through the side to take care of Buc'ee. But that sitter never showed. Greg didn't find out until Sunday evening when he came back into an area with reception. That's when he saw the missed calls, the voicemails from Maria and me, and a notification from the dog-sitting app saying the sitter had canceled after he had already left. Panicked, he rushed back to the city, but on the way, his rental car broke down. Out in the middle of nowhere, with no signal, he walked miles trying to get help. Somewhere along the way, he says, he collapsed from heat exhaustion and ended up in a rural clinic without ID or a phone. It wasn't until Monday afternoon that someone helped him get to a bus station. And that's where the police had eventually traced his last known location. He hadn't meant to leave Buc'ee alone. He hadn't even realized the sitter had backed out until it was too late. "I was stupid," he said, eyes red and raw. "I should have told you or someone. I just wanted a break. I didn't think. God, I didn't think." He knelt down on the grass, and that's when Buc'ee, who had been snoozing by the side of my porch, saw him. His ears perked up, and for a second, he didn't move. Then he bolted across the lawn like a lightning bolt and threw himself into Greg's arms, tail wagging so hard it looked like it might fall off. Greg cried. Buc'ee licked the tears off his face. I just stood there, arms crossed, torn between relief and residual anger. Greg apologized again, not just to me but to the whole neighborhood. He took responsibility for the poor judgment call. He even printed out handwritten letters of apology and dropped off gift cards to everyone on our street. He enrolled in a local therapy program afterward. Turns out he had been dealing with burnout, loneliness, and anxiety for a long time. The retreat was supposed to be a reset, but he'd learned the hard way that you can't run from your problems and expect everything else to stay in place. As for Buc'ee, he came out of it stronger, more loved than ever. And Greg, he changed too. He became more present, more engaged. He started joining block parties, walking Buc'ee at times when people were out and about. He even helped fix up the community garden that summer. What started as a heartbreaking oversight turned into a transformation, one born from community, compassion, and a second chance. That summer taught us all a lot. About the importance of checking in, about stepping up when things feel wrong, about forgiveness, and how even the best of us can mess up, but what we do after, that's what really matters. If this story moved you even just a little, take a second to give it a like. It really helps more people hear stories like this. And if you've ever had a neighbor, a pet, or even just a gut feeling that didn't sit right, drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story too. And hey, if you want more real, raw, human moments like this, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from, because sometimes the smallest moments, they turn into the biggest lessons. Thanks for being here, and give your dog an extra hug tonight for Buc'ee.